this week, Jets wide receiver Garrett Wilson was over on Twitter talking about Bryce Young and how he's impressed by what he's been able to do in Carolina this season. That has Panther fans wondering, will Garrett Wilson one day be a Carolina Panther? And by one day, maybe in 2025. I'll answer that question among other listener questions on this weekly Friday Mailbag edition of Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and yes, of course, Friday. Your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show here on YouTube and listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council. Why? Because it's Friday, and what am I doing throughout the offseason on Fridays? I'm answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. So what you need to do is either at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council to get your questions in for next week's edition of the weekly Friday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. This episode of Locked On Panthers is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Let's go back to earlier this week when it was announced that Ejiro Evero will in fact be back for his third and possibly final year as the Carolina Panthers defensive coordinator, as this is the final year of his deal. And if the defense does not go from the worst in franchise history and arguably the worst in NFL history, then I don't see him getting a fourth year in a new contract here in Carolina. But right now, Dave Canales is standing by his man, and that certainly frustrated a lot of people within this fan base. How can someone who has had the worst scoring defense in the history of the NFL come back and keep this job? I thought the NFL was a meritocracy, was a results-oriented business. What kind of message does this send that he's maintaining his job and his status here in Carolina? Certainly a worthwhile question. It also frustrated people because there's a one-man named Robert Saleh out there, who, of course, is friends with Dave Canales. We found that out back in August when the Jets, who Saleh used to be the head coach for, and the Panthers had joint practices during week 2 of the preseason. And because of that relationship in the NFL being a relationship business, people thought maybe Robert Saleh, who will be one of the top DCs on the market, he is also getting head coaching interviews again this coaching cycle, that possibly he'd come back down here to Carolina and he could fix the Panthers defense, but that will not be the case. But the Panthers now, at least Panther fans, have another New York Jet and potentially maybe former New York Jet to look at and hope he comes to Carolina this offseason. Who is that? Well, it's Garrett Wilson. Jake, starting out the questions here on today's show, saying, despite the Panthers having the worst defense in franchise history, what is your opinion on a potential Garrett Wilson trade? I think pairing a young, proven wide receiver with Bryce would be awesome, but it would be one less value draft pick to bolster the defense. I think I would slightly lean to the Wilson side, but I would love your opinion, and I will give you my opinion on the matter here, Jake. And let's go ahead and look, though, at the draft picks Carolina Panthers have coming up here in the 2025 NFL draft. They have their own first rounder, which is 8th overall. They have the Los Angeles Rams second rounder. That comes from the Braden Fisk trade, as the Rams traded up to get him. They have their own third rounder, their own fourth rounder. The Cowboys' fourth rounder, their own fifth rounder. The Cowboys' fourth rounder is from the Jonathan Mingo trade. The New York Jets or New York Giants' fifth rounder, that comes from the Brian Burns trade. Ravens' fifth rounder, of course, the Deontay Johnson trade. And the Cardinals' seventh rounder goes all the way back to the Robbie Anderson chosen, Robbie chosen, whatever his name is, trade a couple of years ago. So that's what they have to work with. Now, looking at the situation with Garrett Wilson, he went out on Twitter, and I guess there's a video someone put out there of a throw from Bryce Young, and Garrett Wilson was applauding Bryce Young. And, of course, in New York, they fired Saleh. They fired Joe Douglas, the general manager. Aaron Rodgers likely not going to be back. Rex Ryan, who used to coach the Jets, may coach the Jets again, interviewed for the job a week ago, and he was on NFL Sunday Countdown on ESPN on Sunday saying that, no, Aaron Rodgers will not be the quarterback next year. Why is that? Well, because he probably has an idea, considering he interviewed for the job, and that Woody, the owner up there, Woody Johnson, and Aaron Rodgers, that relationship's kind of soured. Reports out there this year that Woody Johnson wanted Aaron Rodgers to be benched at some point in time in the season. That, of course, never happened. So Rodgers' time is likely done, which leaves a pretty big void at quarterback. And Garrett Wilson has already dealt with Zach Wilson not being very good, Aaron Rodgers not being very good. Does he want to head into year 4 dealing with the same kind of issues, or does he want to get out of New York and finally go somewhere where he has a quarterback? And it looks like a landing spot for a prospective wide receiver 1, which Garrett Wilson certainly is and would be here in Carolina. Now, you got to look at it. It's got a 5th-year option. The Panthers going to have to pick up, but they do make that trade. That's $16.6 million based off of the playtime benchmark. They already would also have to pick up Ike Ekwuonus's 5th-year option. That's a lot of cap money immediately on the books for 2026 with those two guys. And understand, too, that you're going to have to extend him eventually, and you're not trading for Garrett Wilson not to extend him later on down the road. In the same case with Ike Ekwonu, if you're going to give him the 5th-year option, and Dan Morgan said what he said about him on Monday, how he wants him to be here for a long time, a lot of money. JC Horn as well, and the Panthers still have some other areas of certain need. I don't know if wide receiver 1 should be the top priority as far as what they're going to acquire this offseason, but I definitely think it is one of my top priorities for what they should do this offseason is getting that guy. But they need to fix the defense, of course, and understand this too. The Jets, and I always tell people when they ask me, oh, should the Panthers trade for this person? Well, are they good? And if the answer is yes, then of course they should be interested in them, but it's going to cost. And for the Jets, I also tell people to ask themselves, why would New York do this? Why would the Jets, who have struggled offensively and have just struggled to make the playoffs, it's not been since 2010, why would the Jets give up one of the best young wide receivers in the NFL? And what are they getting in return that's going to help them? Now, if they get another top 10 pick, which would be the case if they trade Carolina, because I cannot imagine New York is giving up Garrett Wilson and not getting the Panthers first rounder this year. I don't know why they would say yes to that. Now, if they were willing to say yes to that, is it worth the Panthers giving up 8th overall for Garrett Wilson? Or would it make more sense to stay at 8th overall, potentially trade back, get more assets, and then get more players instead of just Garrett Wilson, or get somebody who has a more cost-controlled contract, as Wilson will not cost you too much in 2025, but he will certainly cost you a lot in 2026 and a lot beyond that. And you just drafted Xavier Legette in the first round, and is there still hope that he could be the wide receiver 1? So I think Garrett Wilson's great. I think it would be awesome he can come here. I'm just pointing out that if they do that, it's going to cost him 8th overall. I do not see why in the hell the Jets would accept anything. And maybe they're going to take the first round pick next year, but why, just looking at where they're at right now, new GM coming in, new head coach, new quarterback likely. Yeah, I would want to have 2 picks in the top 10 this season. I'm not waiting for next season where they're probably going to be a top 10 again to be able to start building my team, especially if you're going to lose a guy like Garrett Wilson. So maybe it happens. I think it's probably unlikely because I don't think the Jets would want to trade him, but we'll see. He hasn't also come out and said he wants to be traded. So we'll monitor the situation. Still think that they're likely going to have to try and spend some money in free agency opposed to giving up draft assets. And this is still a team that needs to be trying to get some young, cheap options through the draft. And I don't know, as good as Wilson is, if that's the right move. Not saying it's the wrong move. I'm not sure if it's the right move. Maybe it is. All right, Will. He says, obviously, we need a true nose tackle because Shy Tuttle did not get it done. That is saying it lightly. Would you rather see that position addressed in free agency or through the draft, taking someone like Mason Graham out of Michigan? Well, if they want to get somebody like Mason Graham out of Michigan, they can't trade to get Garrett Wilson, because I do not, again, believe the Panthers will be able to keep 8th overall and also get Garrett Wilson. If they do, bravo, Dan Morgan, but probably gave up a first-round pick in 2026. And you don't want to keep doing that. Morgan has talked about he wants to have a pick in every single round, and I don't know if that's what – if it might be possible to get that first-round pick back. They get the second-round pick back after they had traded away to the Bears to get up to number 1 to get Bryce Young. They got that back by having Los Angeles trade up in the second round. So great business there by Dan Morgan, and in large part, he was able to get that second-round pick and be able to make that trade because of the trade that they did with Brian Burns and sending him to the New York Giants and getting the compensation they got from the Giants with that extra second-round pick. So I don't know if Mason Graham would be available there. It would make sense, of course, because they could use somebody. I would probably be leaning, just looking at things right now without even knowing what the roster is going to look like come late April. I'd be leaning at edge rusher. Abdul Carter. Not sure if you caught the game last night down in Orange Bowl. Dude is a problem, and he would be outstanding, I think, for Carolina to get right there at 8th overall if he's even available. And I would think probably not at this point in time. That dude is incredible. But looking at some other options, I think free agency probably makes the most sense. You got a guy like Javon Hargrave, who I did not bring up on the offseason to-do list because I did not think that he would be somebody that'd be affordable for Carolina. But I saw my buddy Mike K, who actually will be on the show on Monday, and we talked more about that already recorded with Mike. But he mentioned that would make sense. BJ Hill to Cincinnati, or at Cincinnati, the Bengals. He'd make sense. Jared Reed, Poona Ford, like those could be options. And in the draft, talked about this yesterday. Mason Graham would be, if you're going to take somebody there at 8. Kenneth Grant, probably not going to be available by the time you draft again for Carolina. Tyreek Williams at Ohio State, same case. Walter Nolan, maybe, but probably not. Then you're looking at guys like Omar Norman Lott out of Tennessee, Alfred Collins out of Texas. Check him out tonight in the Cotton Bowl, and then Deion Walker out of Kentucky. So that's where things would stand. So I do think that go get somebody proven instead of wanting to go get somebody who's younger. Now, they got a guy like Jaden Crumedy who they're going to develop, and they talked about that on Monday, how important it is to develop the guys that are already in-house. So continue to do that with someone like Jaden Crumedy and maybe some of the other younger guys that have played as well, but go out and get a veteran presence, as this defensive line has just been not good for years now. So go fix it, I think, via free agency instead of waiting until the draft. But we'll see if that works out. All right, so quick pause. Come back here. I'll answer more of your weekly Friday mailbag questions right here on Locked On Panthers. This is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Are you tired of the endless waiting, wondering, and worrying about your taxes? Well, now that's a thing of the past. You see, taxes don't need to be complicated or stressful. TurboTax is here to change the game by matching you with a TurboTax expert who can get the work on your return right away. No more waiting for answers. No more wondering if you're missing on deductions. Whether you've got one form or 20, TurboTax experts give your taxes their undivided attention while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on what really matters. You won't have to lift the finger, but you'll get peace of mind knowing your taxes are being handled by pros, ready for stress-free taxes and the most money back guaranteed. Head over to TurboTax.com today and get matched with your expert who's ready to take your taxes off your plate so you can focus on your day. Only available with TurboTax live, full service, real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most of these final weeks of football action. That's where PrizePicks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the games, PrizePicks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With PrizePicks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns, and for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money, you can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or want to cash out quickly, PrizePicks has got you covered. And with over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving this platform. Here's a special offer for Locked On Panther listeners. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's PrizePicks. Run your game. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. Run your game. All right, back here on Locked On Panthers. Now over to Jason, who has a question saying, do you think David Tepper really is staying away from the football side of things, or has the organization done a better job of handling him so it seems he is staying away? Or, and just throwing this out there, did the NFL/Roger Goodell tell him to calm down the antics and Tepper is doing his best to adhere to that request? Yeah, so I said the other day that David Tepper has taken a step back. I have been told this by people. We have even seen from just the fact that the Panthers actually look like a competent operation that maybe David Tepper has not been that involved, or maybe he's been involved, but Dave Canales and Dan Morgan and Brant Tillis and everybody else there within the organization are actually able to win out and do their jobs. That's certainly a possibility, but I think actually it's been more that David Tepper has truly taken a step back, understood the errors of his ways, and that the fact that the Panthers have been bad all these years because really of him and his decision-making and his constant coaching firings and hirings, and all the guys he's hired have not necessarily worked out. The quarterbacks that they have brought in, where, of course, Sam Darnold's played well in Minnesota, Baker Mayfield's played well in Tampa, but those situations did not work out here in Carolina for a myriad of reasons. And maybe if this was a more stable situation, a better ownership group, that could have worked out with Sam. That could have worked out with Baker. But here we are where things look like they're working out with Bryce Young right now, who, again, David Tepper wanted. But as far as your question goes, the NFL did not talk to David Tepper. Like, I highly doubt that was a thing. And understand this, David Tepper owns a team. The owners have control. Roger Goodell works for them. Roger Goodell is not going over to David Tepper and being like, hey, David, you need to relax. You're embarrassing the league. He's not doing that. Now, the NFL, of course, they reprimanded him last year. He got fined for the whole incident in Jacksonville. That can happen, but there's only so much that they can do. Like, they're not going to take away his team because he threw a drink on a fan in Jacksonville. There's got to be far more egregious things. And the owners also have to vote him out. Like, it's not Goodell who's making the decisions. It's the owners who make the decisions. And the owners, well, they're right there on the same team as David Tepper. So no, I don't think the NFL came in and told him, hey, chill out, dude. I really think it's just that he understands that they have not been winning and that he has not helped the matters of the situation. That he's gone out there and embarrassed himself a couple of times, embarrassed the organization, and that it makes more sense to let the people who he hired to do the football, and that he could step aside and let them do that and just cut the checks. So I think that's actually what's been happening. And you go back to the decision earlier this season. David Tepper, the guy who wanted Bryce Young and said he gave the Panthers the best option among the quarterbacks available in that 2023 draft, not to just win a Super Bowl, to win Super Bowls, multiple. Why, after 2 games, would he want to see Bryce Young benched? Like, I didn't understand the benching at all. Now, I blame David Tepper at that point in time because David Tepper is the blame for everything. David Tepper is the one who wanted Bryce Young. And I came out here and I also said that Bryce Young was the best of those guys available. And I came out draft day and said, you know what? Honestly, with the way they got things situated, they want to develop a quarterback. Why don't you take the guy who has the best body and the best physical tools? And that would be Anthony Richardson, who obviously has not panned out so far in Indianapolis. And it looks like Bryce was, in fact, the better pick of those two. Was he better than CJ Stroud? Let's still let it play out and see how things work out down the road for both the Texans and for the Panthers with their respective quarterbacks. So I looked at David Tepper as the problem there. And I look at David Tepper as the problem for anything that goes wrong in Carolina, because had Bryce not panned out, well, it was Tepper who wanted him. And it was Tepper and Nicole, or David and Nicole, who fell in love with Bryce down there in Tuscaloosa. And it's not to say that Bryce wasn't somebody that everyone on the coaching staff wanted, but did Scott Pitter have the autonomy to get his own quarterback, or really was it going to always be David Tepper's pick? Now it seems like the picks that are happening, the signings, all of that, it's Dan and Dave and Brant. It's not David. All right, over to Jake now. He says, or he asked, does stability attract more experienced coaches to the staff, seeing the early defensive coaching changes? Should we attract better coaches to the staff, seeing what Morgan/Canales did in year 1 together? What does our salary cap look like, and how aggressive can Dan Morgan be in the offseason? I do think stability certainly helps, knowing that the Panthers are not changing offensive or defensive coaching staffs, at least the entire coaching staffs this offseason. That will help in hiring people. Now, it does not look like, as far as offensively, they're going to be hiring anybody new, and that Dave Canales can be around for more than just this upcoming season. It feels like that's a good thing, as far as if they lose anybody, they can bring people in. This makes it more of an attractive situation. I don't know about defensively. They are coming off of the worst defensive season in franchise history. You have to wonder, with Gerald Barrow's in the final year of his deal, how many guys are trying to come over here knowing that potentially after the season, they won't be a part of the coaching staff. They may be retained by the new DC, or that guy comes from out of house or in-house. But that's something you can necessarily bank on. So I don't know how attractive it would be for assistants coming in, replacing Tim Lukabu, who's the outside linebacker coach. He's gone. Replacing Burt Watts, who was the safeties coach. He's gone. Are you really, as a prospective outside linebacker coach, that excited to come here when you could be gone after 1 year? Same thing at safety. Would you want to be here if potentially after this upcoming season, that's going to be it? And it kind of goes back to when the reporting came out from Jay Glazer, which never really made any sense, that Matt Rule had to hire a rock star OC to keep his job. And why on earth would he keep his job anyways? Like, go ahead and fire him if it comes down to that. But what guys were going to want to come take this job, knowing that it could be over after 1 year? And that was certainly the case for Ben McAdoo, who didn't have a lot of options out there. And the only reason he came here because he's a Tom Coughlin disciple, and who is a mentor of Matt Rule? Well, Tom Coughlin. So I don't know. I wouldn't say it's that attractive, just based off of the ability to, the stability of the job that you're taking, that you're going to be coming into. Like, will you be around after next season? Maybe, maybe not. As far as salary cap goes, looking at overthecap.com, Panthers have $29 million. It's not a ton of cap space. They will need to open it up. They can do that by, as I talked about with Taylor Moton, they can either extend him, restructure again. That can open up $12-13 million. Some other guys out there that they could try to sign and get some extensions going on, like J.C. Horn. That can open up some cap space for the Panthers. So right now, $29 million. And Dan said they're going to be aggressive, smart, but aggressive. So we'll see how that plays out here in the coming months. All right, going to take one more quick pause, come back and answer the rest of your weekly Friday mailbag questions right here on Locked On Panthers. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, back here on Locked On Panthers. A couple more questions here on this weekly Friday mailbag edition of the show. Over to Ray, who actually has two questions. He says, does Jalen Coker, being an undrafted rookie, have to wait 3 to 4 years for a second contract, or can he get paid what he should whenever the team decides? Also, would half of Detroit's backups defensively be immediate stars in the Panthers defense? Their backups do not look like backups. Yeah, Aaron Glenn, a masterclass last Sunday night against the Vikings, and that winner gets the number 1 seed. The loser gets to be the 5 seed, go on the road against the Rams, where that game has actually been moved to Arizona because of the wildfires out there in California. And again, any of the listeners out there, hopefully everything is fine wherever you're at, and hope you're safe. And of course, everybody out there in Pacific Palisades area in California and LA, heart goes out to you because that is just devastating. I know late last year, it would have been a lot of people in this state lost their homes, lost their livelihoods because of Hurricane Helene, and we're still recovering. And I can only imagine how long it's going to take for cities like Asheville that are still asking people to go up there and to visit. And then still other mountain towns like Swanoa still just looks, god dang, almost cursed. But yeah, it's devastating to see all that happen. But as far as your question goes, yes, the Lions backups probably would be starters on this team. And then as far as Coker goes, he's a free agent after this upcoming season. So free agent in 2026, the Panthers would need to make a deal with him. Then it's possible they decide they could give him a deal now. That would be dumb. You have another year of this guy making absolutely no money at all. Why give him any money? So wait until next year. If he plays well again and it's around this time, around in February, then it would make sense to give him an extension. So one more year, and then the Panthers will have to make a decision as far as how things play out with Jalen Coker. Joe, he says, I really think a big undiscussed moment from the season was when Deontay Johnson was traded. Just how big of an impact that had on Bryce Young. The very next game is when everything turned around for him. Plus, look at how the rest of the season played out for Deontay. Would love to hear your input on this. I don't know whether that is the case or not. He was traded. Deontay Johnson was to the Ravens back in week 9. Of course, a lot of fans were not happy about what the Panthers got for him, as it was a pick swap. The Ravens gave the Panthers their 5th round pick. The Panthers gave the Ravens their 6th round pick, and it did not necessarily lead to them moving up that far. So we haven't seen where the Ravens are going to finish their season. If they lose on Saturday, that will be hopeful, as that will make that pick a lot better. If they keep winning, of course, that will not make the pick as good as Panthers would like, as far as how far they've moved up from their 6th round pick to where the Ravens would be in the 5th round, where they have their pick now. But he turned out to be a malcontent there and refused to go into a game. And the Ravens suspended him. Then they cut him. He's been picked up off of waivers against the Texans. No idea if he's in the game plan for Saturday afternoon there in Houston in the playoffs. But he has not done himself any favors. And I do not imagine very many teams are going to be lining up come March to sign him to a new deal. At least the kind of deal he could have gotten had he just acted right in Carolina, acted right in Baltimore, just acted right at all this season. And that is on him. I don't think, though, because he left, that was the reason why Bryce Young all of a sudden started playing better. Like, having the vibes be better certainly helps, but Bryce had to get back in there against the Broncos, and he played well against the Saints and all that. It certainly is interesting that once Deontay Johnson left, that Bryce Young started playing really well. I don't think that's the reason, of course. There's multiple reasons why Bryce played well. I don't necessarily think that Johnson really is a reason at all. It's just coincidental, in my opinion. All right, final question from AJ. He says, I know injuries are big in football because it's physical sport, but how is it over the last few seasons that the team sustained so many injuries? The offensive line was a mess a year ago. The defensive side of the ball was a mess this year and even last year, man. Is it players not taking the best care of themselves? Is it just bad luck, or is it strength and conditioning side of things? Seems like the other 31 teams in the league don't lose starters like this team does. Well, do you look at the Lions this year? How many guys the Lions have lost? We talked about the backups earlier. Was it with Ray just a moment ago? They have lost a ton of guys. So I don't know. Well, it seems like bad luck for Detroit. The Niners had a lot of injuries. They've had bad injuries in the past too. I think it's more just bad luck. It could go in part as far as, do the players take care of themselves? And JC Horn changed up his workout routine in the offseason to try and not get injured this year. And he played 15 out of 17 games. So possibly that goes into it. Strength and conditioning. I know usually in college, if a team has a bunch of injuries like the Panthers had, especially like those muscle injuries, which is so interesting, which is part of the reason why there's been a pseudo push to change the way the NFL offseason structures so the players have a longer ramp up period. You see a lot of those muscle injuries happen early on in training camp because guys are really getting back out there and pushing their bodies, and teams try to make sure that they don't have those injuries by giving guys some off days, but they still happen. They happen a ton. Like how many hamstring injuries do the Panthers have this season? Maybe that's on strength and conditioning. Maybe it's on the players. I think it's overall, it's football, man. It's a brutal sport. It's a grind. And this is kind of what happens sometimes. So I don't know. Hopefully we're better luck. The Panthers certainly are due. Both sides of the ball have had better luck as far as injury goes. And if they do in 2025, maybe they'll be contenders in the NFC South. So we'll see how that works out. That's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, for our Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe, follow the show free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where I will be back with you next Friday answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. All you got to do is either at me or DM me to get those questions in for the show next week. In the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole, as always, keep pounding. And I will talk to you on Monday, where Mike Kay of the Charlotte Observer will join me to discuss the Panthers offseason and how they can fix this defense.